Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today. My name is Alex Beasley, and I am an Amenity Technical Sales Representative for Germinal Amenity, covering the West Midlands, South Midlands, South Wales, and the South West regions. And I'm your host for our webinar today. Just to give you a little bit of an overview for our webinar, we'll be covering breeding clover for net zero landscapes. And I will be shortly handing over to my colleague, Dr. David Lloyd, Head of Plant Breeding, and is involved in the breeding programme of clovers and legumes at IBIS in Aberystwyth, which is where one of Germinal's main research centres is based, called Germinal Horizon Aberystwyth. Our other R&D site is Germinal Horizon Wiltshire near Melksham, and our research and development programme takes up 20% of Germinal's overall business now. David will give you an insight into the breeding programme of clovers and legumes. Following that, I will be handing over to my colleague, Richard Brown, Amenity Director at Germinal Amenity. Richard will present the benefits of clovers for net zero projects in the landscaping market, and this will include details of Germinal's a sustained mix, part of our climate smart range. But let's start off right back at the beginning, where it all began. And Germinal was founded in 1825 by Mr. Samuel McCausland in Belfast, the gentleman you can see on the screens today. And the original building is just 500 yards from our group head office today. So 2025 is a very important year for Germinal, as we celebrate our 200-year anniversary. And Germinal is still a sixth-generation family-run business, and Mr. Samuel McCausland is the great-great-great-grandfather of William Gilbert, our MD. And we are very, very proud of our heritage for our business. During our 200 years of Germinal has been a specialist seed company for 150 of those years. Our teams across the Germinal business are extremely proud of the high levels of quality maintained in seed production, supply chain, staff knowledge, and the highest standards of customer service, providing seed into the agricultural and amenity markets. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to hand you over to Dr. David Lloyd.
Excellent. Okay, so as Alex said, my name's David Lloyd. I am head of plant breeding for Germinal, based in Aberystwyth University, and I lead a team of about 15 plant breeders, mainly in the agricultural sphere, but also in the amenity sphere. And I'm going to be talking a bit about what we're doing with clovers and other similar legumes that are applicable to amenity uses. So clovers are members of the legume family, so they're related to peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas, all sorts of things like that. And one of the really neat things about legumes is that they are nitrogen fixing. They convert atmospheric nitrogen that's in the air into forms that the plant can use. And you can essentially think of this as free nitrogen fertilizer. Their primary use is agricultural, obviously, mostly for forage, but they also have the potential to improve the environmental sustainability of amenity grassland. The flowers are insect pollinated, so they promote biodiversity, and they flower throughout the year, with different species being attracted to different species attracting different pollinators. And they've obviously got an aesthetic purpose to them as well. They've also got an extensive root architecture, which improves the soil structure, which we'll get into in a little bit. So these are the roots of clover, and what you can see on those are specialist structures that we call root nodules. And these root nodules host symbiotic bacteria that we call rhizobia. And rhizobia are what takes the atmospheric nitrogen and convert them into ammonia using an enzyme called nitrogenase. And this ammonia is then taken up into the plant as amino acids using a system called the GS-GOGAT system. What that means, it doesn't really matter too much. They can fix between 50 and 400 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. And there's various reasons for that. Some of that nitrogen is available for companion species as well. So it also benefits sort of companion grasses that go along with them. So why would we want to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer we use? So currently we use about 390,000 tons of nitrogen fertilizer on UK grasslands every year. That's 390,000 tons just of the nitrogen itself. So you're looking about twice that amount in terms of the actual fertilizer used. The manufacture of this nitrogen fertilizer utilizes fossil fuels. It's produced through a process we call the Haber-Bosch process, which essentially combines natural gas, methane, and atmospheric nitrogen under very high temperatures, high pressures, using various catalysts to produce ammonia. And the production of that amount of nitrogen fertilizer produces about 1.4 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents at what we call EU BAT. So that's the European Union best available technologies. If we're looking at nitrogen fertilizer production elsewhere in the world, it can be a lot higher than that. There's also the associated cost of transport and application of the fertilizer. On top of that, the application of nitrogen fertilizer stimulates types of bacteria that we call denitrifying bacteria. And what this bacteria want to do is to convert the nitrogen fertilizer back to nitrogen gas and to nitrous oxide. And around about 0.4% of the nitrogen we apply to the grassland is converted to nitrous oxide, which doesn't really sound a lot, but nitrous oxide has a very, very high global warming potential, around about 300 times that of carbon dioxide. So what we're looking at is really an additional 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. It's also the most important anthropogenic ozone depleting substance. And you have the problems of nitrate leaching. You get the picture. We really need to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer we're using. So currently we are running a project called New Leg, which is a very large publicly funded project funded through DEFRA Farming Innovation Program, large R&D partnerships. It's a multi-agency project led by us, Germinal, but also encompassing Aberystwyth University, IBERS, James Hutton Institute up in Dundee, and various other companies. And what we're trying to do with that project is to look at the types of rhizobia that we have present. So being able to screen a collection of rhizobia that we've taken over the last 80 years or so, looking for better rhizobia that have better nitrogen fixation potentials and better ability to infect the host plant. We're looking to improve legume genetics. So looking at 3 different species, white clover, red clover, and lotus, looking to improve the genetics of those to enhance the nodulation potential of the plants. So getting more root nodules on the plants and optimizing the combination of rhizobia and legume. On top of that, we're looking at developing prescription soil nutrition options. So really on the basis of a soil test, looking at the micronutrients that are present and being able to enhance the amount of micronutrients that are required for the actual nitrogen fixation, so that we're supporting nitrogen fixation rather than using fertilizer just to replace nitrogen fixation. And we're looking at various other things like digital aids for growers and life cycle analysis to really get an idea of how we're actually improving the environmental sustainability of grassland. So looking first at white clover, this is the one that everyone knows. It's the one which grows in everyone's lawns. It has a stoloniferous growth habit, so it produces these horizontal stems that grow from the crown of the plant, grow along the surface of the ground, and reproduce by putting down adventitious roots. These are roots that come out of the stems and produce daughter plantlets. So they're essentially producing clones of that original plant around it. They're available in different leaf sizes, and the leaf size really sort of tells us what we can use them for. And for amenity uses, we'd really be looking at small leaf sizes. The overall anatomy of the plant is reflected in the leaf size, so you tend to get smaller plants, much shorter distances between rooting points. So you tend to find that the small leaf sizes will be more tolerant of frequent defoliation, whether that's through mowing in amenity purposes or through grazing if it was in an agricultural purpose. And this slide is a really neat sort of illustration of how clovers can improve the soil structure. So they really sort of break up the soil matrix, reducing compaction, improving aeration, getting air into the roots of the plants, improving fertilizer recovery, improving nutrient and water movement throughout the soil, improving soil fertility, and also providing a habitat for earthworms. So you tend to find that soil that has white clover in it, or any clovers, tend to have greater populations of earthworms. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Caucasian clover, which is a really sort of interesting species of clover that we started working on maybe about 30, 40 years ago. As the name would suggest, it's found in the Caucasian mountainous regions, looking at sort of Eastern Europe going into Central Asia. It's also known as Kura clover. It grows naturally in mountainous regions, so it's very well adapted to thin soils. So it has natural adaptations to sudden changes in temperature and also to drought. It has underground stems, so that rather than having stolons, the stems tend to grow underneath the ground. We call these rhizomes. They tend to be quite slow growing. It can be hybridized with white clover, which is technically difficult, but using a bit of laboratory trickery, so basically taking the developing seed and growing it on nutrient agar, we were able to produce mature plants, mature hybrids between white clover and Kura clover, Caucasian clover, that we were able to back cross into white clover. And through that process, we were able to produce a white clover that has some of the traits of Caucasian clover, most notably the drought tolerance and tolerance to sudden changes of temperature that white clover doesn't have. And we're marketing these as double root, and the name comes from the fact that you have these underground stems, which are almost like another type of root. The first variety of these is called Aberlasting, and I think we're including those in our amenity mixes at the moment. And you can see on that slide, these are the rhizomes underneath the surface. It's a hybrid between white clover and Caucasian clover, mostly white clover, but it's drought tolerant, cold tolerant, and very tolerant of hard defoliation, so very tolerant of mowing. And this slide really shows the difference you get when you expose these plants to long periods of drought, of water deficit. So on the right-hand side of that slide, you can see the double root, and that has been subjected to about 4 weeks of water deficit, so not watered for 4 weeks. On the left-hand side, you can see a similar but white clover type, and it's pretty much gone to meet its maker. We've also been looking in some depth at phosphorus use efficiency. Now, phosphorus is an essential macronutrient of plants, and legumes are notorious for being phosphorus hungry. It's a limited resource. It's mostly mined as rock phosphate, and the major producing areas are not necessarily that reliable in terms of future supply. So the largest producing area is China, and their largest production area is the Hubei province, capital of which is Wuhan. And as you can imagine, 5 years ago, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we started to have some difficulties with supply of phosphate from China. On top of that, China is recognizing that it's a limited resource, and they're starting to curtail exports because they recognize that they will need it for the future. So for those reasons, we've been developing types of clover that are able to grow under lower phosphorus addition rates than is standard. And this has been through a process of what we call recurrent mass selection. So essentially growing clovers, selecting them under very low fertility conditions, growing them over repeated generations, and selecting the best every time. And we've managed to produce a variety which has just gone into recommended list trials last year. So within the next few years, it should be available on the market. It's a long, slow process, as plant breeding always is, but it's starting to yield results. So red clover is very similar to white clover in a lot of ways. Conventional varieties have limited use in amenity purposes. They tend to grow upright from a central crown, very useful for agricultural purposes because they're very high yielding, but that crown is very vulnerable to damage. So it doesn't do very well under situations where there's repeated defoliation, because the crown gets damaged, and once the crown is damaged, that lets in disease and the plant quickly disappears. We've developed a stoloniferous red clover, so very similar to white clover in a lot of ways. It's very, very highly tolerant of defoliation through mowing, as good as the best white clover is. It flowers continuously through the season, attracts pollinators, different pollinators than white clover would attract. So it has real beneficial benefits for biodiversity. And this particular variety has a really, really vibrant, deep pink color to the flowers. So it looks really amazing when it's in a sward. So that's been introduced into recommended list trials this year. So it's a few years off yet, but watch this space. And just finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about birdsfoot trefoil. So this is another legume that's beneficial for pollinators. Again, attracts different pollinators. Existing varieties tend to have very poor persistency, except under very, very low fertility conditions where they're experiencing less competition from other plants. But we've managed to produce varieties that have the persistency of a white clover. And they're a very attractive plant as well, and they're being seed is being produced for entry into national list trials at the moment. So just to summarize, clovers and amenity legumes have an increasing role to play in the amenity sphere. They improve environmental status of grassland, increase biodiversity, and there's major scope for innovation in this area. So improving nitrogen fixation, improving the resilience of grassland in the face of climate change, and also improving the environmental status of grassland. So thanks very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you, David. That was really interesting and informative. You do have a question here. Let me just open it up for you. Are these new bred clovers a danger to UK native white clovers?
That's a really good question. It's particularly interesting because it raises the question: what is a UK native white clover? So white clover itself is a hybrid of two different species of clover that occurred naturally about 10,000 years ago, when we had the retreat of the glaciers after the last ice age. It's a hybrid between Trifolium occidentale, western clover, and Trifolium pallescens, the common name of which I can't remember. Doesn't really matter though. It really sort of that occurred in sort of Central Europe, and it really was spread as a weed through the rest of Western Europe into the UK with the introduction of agriculture. It really sort of took off as a plant around about 300 years ago in the UK when people started importing seed from the continent. So most of the clover that you actually find in the UK is not native anyway. You tend to find that a lot of the grasses, a lot of the clovers will hybridize naturally anyway. And what you tend to find out there isn't that natural. So I would say that there's no real danger in terms of displacing native plants because there aren't any.
And that's brilliant. Thank you for that, David. So that's covered all the questions for yourself. So do appreciate your time and thank you for that. So I'd like to hand over now to Richard Brown, Germinal Amenities Amenity Director. So thank you, Richard.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. As Alex says, I'm Amenity Director here at Germinal. And as David has very succinctly and in great detail outlined how we breed clovers, why we're breeding them, and how we see developments of that in the future, I'm just now going to try and talk about how you can take advantage currently of that breeding innovation in your landscape schemes. Now, first and foremost, we have our mixture A-Sustain, and you'll find this on our website, formerly known as ABBA-Sustain. A-Sustain is a mixture of low-maintenance grasses and a good, slow-growing amenity perennial ryegrass. It is, for want of a better word, akin to a normal landscape grass seed mixture, such as our A19 general landscaping, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. Importantly, though, the difference with A-Sustain is it contains that element of everlasting double root clover. And as David has said there, that's a clover, a white clover that is more persistent under conditions that would normally damage white clovers and see them not persisting in the sward for so long. And crucially, the reason we want these white clovers in these swards persisting under the drought conditions we're seeing increasingly, under the very cold conditions, if the jet stream decides to stick another beast from the east on us, and under that close mowing, is that we want these clovers in our soil to do what they do best, which is to fix that free, clean nitrogen. And that's the kicker. We really see that this is a great it's a great advance, but it's an elementary win for landscape schemes. If you're specifying a mixture with clover in that is fixing that nitrogen, you negate the need to apply nitrogen on these landscape schemes. And it's still an amazement to me when we get landscape specifications which are heavy on biodiversity, which of course we are hugely supportive of, but you'll get a landscape specification, you'll be searching through it for the grass elements. And prior to the grass element, you'll have seen much emphasis on, wildflower meadows, a biodiversity of different shrubs and trees. And then you come to the large public amenity open space, and there's the blind spot in the landscape sector. It's a normal grass seed mixture specified with a pre-seed fertilizer, and generally not even a slow release pre-seed fertilizer, just a compound granular pre-seed fertilizer, and then a spring-summer application of a 977. So you've got that nitrous oxide being volatilized into the atmosphere at all the detriment that David's previously explained. And so the use of a mixture like A-Sustain on your public amenity spaces, road verges, motorways, is just an elementary environmental win for any landscape architect specifying and for any landscape scheme using a mixture on a large area. And something like A-Sustain, it can be perfectly fine for even low to medium intensity use. So a part where you're going to play sort of Sunday league football on at the weekend, it'll still be fine. It's not going to wear away. The other great advantage of A-Sustain is it grows on poor soils. And I'm going to talk about that more in the next slide, but we've got that ability to grow on poor soils. And as David said, where the flowers are left to come to head, as it were, it's hugely beneficial to pollinators. So this is a slide that is so good, we decided to use it twice, but I'm just going to sort of touch on that illustration and that expand on why that root architecture and that increase in soil structure is important to your schemes. That increase in soil structure by that root architecture of the clover plants is improving the environment for growth for all the plants around the clover as well as the clover itself. It's increasing those macropores. And by increasing those macro pores in the soil, you're getting greater gas exchange, so when the roots respire, and you're getting greater water filtration. So a better environment for everything to grow, which beyond the nitrogen fixation is just a great thing for what you're trying to achieve on your landscape schemes. But perhaps most importantly and intriguingly, the greater the conditions for growth, the greater the amount of root mass of all species you're going to see in that area. And it is proven by several studies that a greater root mass brings potentially greater carbon capture and quicker carbon capture. And this is something we're very interested in going forward in the future. You know, this may be something that your landscape schemes in the future are judged upon. And we're conducting studies at Germinal Horizon Wiltshire to look into this more to see what the exact correlation is there. But there's definitely, you know, the healthier the plants, the greater the root mass, there's that potential there. But then the other big thing, of course, is water filtration. With a changing climate comes obviously greater periods of drought, but then those heavier rain events. And I think we only have to look back to Friday, all of us, to remember what a heavy rain event is like. If you've got large public amenity spaces that are taking that filtration and taking water quicker, then you've got less runoff onto hard standing areas, and you've got potential to cause less issues there. But the important thing to say is the plants don't have to be left to grow really tall and to flower in order to get this benefit. Even when they're close mown, you're getting that benefit from this sort of root architecture. So even when, you know, you're keeping something like A-sustain neat and tidy, and we'll talk about how you can do that in a minute, you're still getting this benefit under the ground. But the final point I'll make on that is it's crucial that you are selecting the right clover for this. So another white clover, just a medium-sized leaf white clover in this situation, will give these benefits for potentially a year or so. But you need that small-leafed white clover such as everlasting, and a white clover with double roots like everlasting that can persist for longer, so that you can be giving these benefits to the landscape scheme year on year on year. So it's important. Variety is important, and breeding is important to that end. So how can you maintain A-sustain? Well, you can cutting height down to 10 mil there. My apologies, that should say 30 mil. As soon as I spotted that straight away, but cutting height down to 30 mil. So you can go all the way down to 30 mil, and that is essentially sort of neat lawns height, for want of just to give a broad sort of spectrum, but you know, football pitch, rugby pitch kind of height. So where you need to, you can mow that down to 10 mil, and you can see there on the edge of this picture that you've still got the clover plants in there, but it's neat and tidy, for want of a better word. But you don't have to mow it that frequently. If you want to, you can maintain this with a minimum of 4 cuts a year. So that gives you great options in a sort of park or public open space. You can have an area mown for neatness, mown for informal play. Then you can leave an area to go really wild on the edges of it. And then almost a bit like a sort of golf semi-rough, you can have an area that's sort of mown at sort of 60 mil, that perpetual clover flowers coming up. And as David said, you won't find many lists of top UK native plants for pollinators that doesn't include trifolium repens, white clover on it. And of course, no fertilizer required. So sowing is the same as any general amenity mixture that you would apply. You want a fine friable seed bed down to 150 mil if possible. Now, of course, if you can't get down to 150 mil, it's 50 mil is all you can do. That works, but like with any mixture, the establishment will be slower and less good. But you want to be aiming for that fine friable seed bed down to 150 mil. Sowing depth of 10 mil, so about 1 centimetre. So just sow that in, either broadcast it and roll it in, or you can use a custom seed drill. But you do that in the way that you sow all your normal grass seed mixtures. And the sowing time, March to October. And that's probably the only downfall with A-sustain, because the clover does want that higher soil temperature. Increasingly in this day and age, we're sort of managing to get away with sowing later in the year. A-sustain, you really would want to be sticking in that sort of March to October brackets, and April to September if you could, just for those higher soil temperatures for the clover to germinate well. Now, since we introduced A-Sustain, we've had quite a lot of interest of people saying, well, we have an existing parkland area that we'd like to be more sustainable. We'd like to fertilise less, but of course we don't want to go turning that over and starting again. Can we stitch clover into an existing grassed area on an amenity setting? And you can. You want to be doing this when soil temperatures are high, but it's not too dry. September, agriculturally, September has been the month for this kind of thing, but you could on an amenity setting get away with it in sort of April or May. There's those kind of months when, again, it's not, temperatures are high, but it's not too dry. You'd need to heavily scarify that area. So you can, with either a power rake or chain harrow, just about might do it, but a power rake really, and there, or a custom scarifier that you'd use on a sports pitch, etc. You can hire those in. Then you'd sow at 5 grams a square metre. You'd broadcast that and then roll it in. Or if you have a custom seed drill, you can stitch it in, but we would recommend a scarification beforehand as well, just to degrade that sward and let those plants compete. So that's very possible. And that's something, if you wanted to do that, you could talk to one of our technical advisors about. So talking just more about benefits of pollinators in the future. So as David said, white clover is hugely beneficial to pollinators, but red clover is beneficial to other types of pollinators. And that's why we're very excited about the likes of red runner, that where we see A-Sustain going in the future is, if you've got A-Sustain in the future, will have red runner and double root in. So you've got the red and the white flowers there. A, it will look lovely, but B, you're impacting more pollinators in that space. You're still improving the soil structure. You're still negating the need for nitrogen. And similarly, bird's-foot trefoils, they're more suited to dry, sandy soils. So we'll be in a situation there where we're benefiting more pollinators, but also we would be able to sort of adapt an A-Sustain type mixture for those drier, sandier sites. So we sort of get site-specific A-Sustain type mixtures, but the message is still the same. You're applying a mixture that's looking after itself and negating this need for nitrogen fertilizers. Yeah, there we go. And when I say negating the need for nitrogen fertilizers, we're talking about a voluntary negation, a moral crusade to do the right thing, which is absolutely what we should be doing, but we're also got an eye to the fact that in the future, surely someone soon is going to say to you, you can only use a certain amount of nitrogen fertilizer. There will be limits placed on what we can do in the future, we think. And what we're trying to do with our breeding at Germinal is breed solutions for you. So when the problems arrive, you've already got the answers. And that's really what all the breeding and all the efforts that David and his team are putting in are there to do, to ensure that as the problems arrive, you can turn to someone like Germinal and we've got the solutions coming down the track. I hope that's been informative. Any questions? And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Richard. That was really informative and excellent. So thank you for that. Couple of questions here. So let's just have a look at the first one for you. Do you think clover will be used in sports pitch seed mixtures? And what is its wear tolerance?
It's an interesting one. Not in football pitches anytime soon, I don't think. Not Premiership football pitches anyway. Although, well, over to David. I mean, maybe we will be doing a wear tolerance trials on clovers soon. But as I said, in informal settings, I think it would be absolutely fine to use an element of clover. On a sports pitch facility where you've got a pitch there, but then you've got a periphery of that where people are sort of sitting on the banks and watching sport, a sort of private school or something like that, then absolutely, why wouldn't you sort of negate your need for fertilizer by saying, right, well, we're going to have a clover element over here, and then we are potentially reducing the amount of nitrogen we're putting on that area because we only need to put that on that sport-specific area. And that may be something, again, a way to, if all of a sudden the amount of nitrogen you can use is limited to a certain amount, you then say, right, well, okay, of course, that's going on the intensively used sports area, but on these other areas, we're going to be looking after ourselves. And similarly, golf, golf semi-roughs, golf tees, not golf greens, obviously, but, there might come a time where If you're a golf course and you're suddenly told you can only use X amount of nitrogen per year, per annum, well, of course, that is going on the greens. But the tees still need to be fertilised and look after themselves, and the sort of fairways to a certain extent. Now, you know, you could tee off from a Clover, you know, and it will fill those gaps afterwards. So, but I wouldn't say never is my message with regards some sports applications. Yeah.
Okay, great, brilliant. Thank you for that. Another question. What is likely to happen to a sustain if it is only mown once or twice a year?
If it's only mown once or twice a year, the grass will grow long, as will the clover, but that's fine. I mean, you'll be managing it almost like a wildflower meadow. So in that situation, you would trim it and probably remove the clippings, and that's how you would go about that. So really, you could manage it in almost a wildflowery way there. But if you were only going to do that, I'd almost recommend one of our sort of climate smart mixtures, or even a wildflower meadow mixture. If you had an area where you knew that was going to be the case, that was going to be the management for that, and you were looking for, then you might choose a different mixture for that. And then sort of further into where people are, public amenity spaces, that would be where a sustain would come into its own. But if you had a sustain and you suddenly thought, well, that area we're going to let go long, yeah, just leave it to itself. Manage it like a wildflower meadow, and other things, the usual suspects, yarrow, black knapweed, black medic, will probably arrive anyway. And over a period of time, you'll get that greater biodiversity and almost that wildflower appearance.
Okay, brilliant. That's excellent. Well, that's covered all the questions, and so really it just leads me to thank Dr. David Lloyd and Richard Brown for their time today. Excellent talks, really informative. So thank you very much. But going forward, if any of the viewers of our webinar today have further questions or wish to have further information or conversations going forward, then Germinal Amenities teams are always there and available to provide assistance for you. Thank you.